Now that we've created a UV map, we can begin baking our textures. To do that, I'll go ahead and switch back to my UV editing screen layout. I'm going to hit the N key to close that panel here on the UV editor and maybe move this over. I'm going to create a new window here by clicking on that tab and dragging down. And I'll switch that new window to a node editor right here. And I think what I want to do is create a properties panel with this over here. So I'll just pull a new window out here, change it to a properties window here, because the bake settings are right down here at the very bottom of the properties window. So I'll need access to that. I'll need to create a new image to bake onto. So when you bake a texture map, you need a blank image to bake that image onto. So I'll click New, and I'll call this M249 gun underscore N for normal map, and I'll make it 2048 by 2048. There we go. I want to keep it blank here for the generated type, and I'll click OK. And there it is. If I scroll out a bit, we can see the whole thing. Now notice that the image menu has a little asterisk by it, and that tells us that the image has been created internally in Blender, but it hasn't yet been saved onto our hard drive of our computer. So we need to do that. I'll come over here and click Image and click Save as Image. And in here, I think I just want to create a new folder. I'll call it Textures. And in my Textures folder, I'll save this M249 gun underscore N. There we go. Now that we've done that, let's also create a material for our low poly model. I'll select it and I'll come over here to the node editor and I'll click New. And let's just call this M249 gun. There we go. And in here, we've got our diffuse shader and our material output. We're also going to need to add an image texture. So I'll press Shift A and add a texture, image, texture. And this just needs to be in here. It doesn't need to be hooked up or anything. We just need to have our image here in an image texture node. So I'll click on this little pull down menu and select that M249 gun underscore N that we just created. So this image here is in this image texture here. All right, so let's come over here to the bake panel, and instead of the bake type being combined, let's just switch it to a normal map. And I will place a check mark right here in selected to active. And in the Blender world, if you select multiple objects, the last one you select is the active object and all the others are selected objects. So we want the active object to be the low poly object. So I'll come over here to layer 1 and I'll select the high poly. Then I'll switch to layer 2 and shift select the low poly. Now I'll go ahead and shift select that layer 1 so they're both visible here. Now the ray distance here is how far Blender is going to project into the object to get the details from the high poly version. It goes from 0 all the way up to 1. I think what I'll do is begin at 0.1. I like to kind of begin low and as I need it, increase it up. And I'm going to choose clear, and what that will do is wipe the contents of the image before it lays down the baked texture. All right, with all of these things in place, I'll go ahead and click Bake. And you can see the progress bar up here at the top. And because we've got such a high-res version of this, I think it's going to take a minute or two. And here we are, the bake is done. Let's go ahead and press Control up arrow and zoom into it, and you can see that what it's done is just baked a lot of that information onto the UV map. Now that it's baked the normal map, we should save it again. Notice there's that asterisk here by the image menu. Let's go ahead and click Save Image once again, and we can see here that it's saved the file to our hard drive. Now let's take a look at it. I'll go back to the layer with the low poly version on it, and let's just connect our color texture up to our diffuse shader, and then let's go over here from solid viewport shading to texture, and we can see just a temporary overlay of the normal map onto our object here. And you can see we've picked up a lot of that information. A lot of the high-res detail here has been captured in the texture map. Now we can take a look at it in another way as well. I'll switch back to solid view here, and then I'll disconnect this, and let's actually connect this up to the displacement and see how it looks. If we just take this directly from here to here, I don't recommend this for a final render or anything, but if we took it from there to there and then went to viewport shading rendered, you can see some of that detail here in the viewport. Right in here. Now I have in the world view, I have ambient occlusion on at about 0.5. But you can see that detail come through here. All right, so let's go ahead and bake one more type of map. I'll go back from rendered viewport shading to solid, and I'll disconnect this right here. Let's create a new image for our ambient occlusion map. I'll come down here and go to Image, New Image, and let's call this M249 gun_AO for ambient occlusion, and I'll click OK, and there it is. Now I can switch it over here in our image texture node. I'll change from the normal map to the ambient occlusion, and once again I'll save the image to the hard drive. Here we go. Now let's go through the same process once again. We will select the high res, then we'll shift select the low, and I'll bring both the layers back now. Let's switch our bake type from normal to ambient occlusion. And the interesting thing about ambient occlusion is that the sample rate for a render in Blender actually affects the ambient occlusion resolution as well. So if we go into sampling, you can see here we've got a render sample of 128. That's probably pretty good, but let's go ahead and take that up to 200, let's say, and really try and get a very clean, smooth ambient occlusion bake out of this. So if you find your ambient occlusion texture map has some grain or is pixelated, you can always come in here and increase the render samples. All right, so let's come back down here, and with everything set up, I believe, let's go ahead and click Bake. And here we have our ambient occlusion map. And it too has captured a lot of that detail from the high poly object. And this will be used in addition to the normal map to provide contact shadows between the pieces of the object. Now we can once again take a look at this. I'll go to the layer with the low poly, and I'll just take this directly into the color and then go to the texture viewport shading, and you can see what that does for us. So there we go. There are two maps that we needed baked out of Blender. So in the next video, what we'll do is we'll prepare to take our model into Substance Painter, where we will look at generating a normal map as well as lots of other maps for texturing and compare the two different processes. So that's coming up next.